So we'll go ahead and begin with Mary.
Thank you. And I apologize, I did have a presentation for you, but I didn't realize we weren't going to have a projector. So we'll just stop a little bit off the
Do we have a
fly.
projector?
Do you have to project here? It'd probably take more time to set it up.
No worries, no worries. So again, I appreciate your time. I wanted to pass out a little bit of information. So I might send a couple of documents around. If you don't mind grabbing one of these and passing it to your neighbor, I appreciate it. We're currently working on a project called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. This is an initiative that is required by HUD, the Housing and Urban Development. And the initiative was created in 2015 and is as a piece of the Fair Housing Act. So the purpose of the initiative is really to give teeth or some backbone to the Fair Housing Act and try to determine where cities and other entities like housing authorities that receive federal housing dollars are failing in terms of, or struggling, I should say, in terms of access to opportunity for different issues. So we look at everything from transportation, education, employment issues, where we have public housing, where there's affordable housing, all the things that are relevant to accessing fair housing and furthering the idea and the concept of fair housing. So it's a process where the city is compiling data that's already collected by HUD. So HUD data is based on, HUD data is based on information by census tract. So they look at different census tracts. They compile things like demographics. They compile different family structures. They compile income, all the different types of information that you can collect when you look at federal data. And they say, this is what we see about Omaha based on this federal data. Well, we all know that you can't look at just numbers and really understand a city or a neighborhood or a community. So one of the things that we are working to do is go to the community and find out, is what HUD has to say about Omaha, is what HUD has to say about your neighborhood or your census tract, what you are also seeing. Is this data correct? And getting community input. And it's a required part of the process, but it's also a part that we're really excited about engaging in. Because in the past, we all know that federal funding hasn't necessarily been determined and allocated by what the community has said or what the community needs. And so this is a portion and a process that we can actually take community input and we're literally feeding it into a federal document that then we have to account for in 5 years. So we're creating strategies and goals based on what the community tells us. Yeah, we see a lack of education in elementary school students in this area, or we see that there is not efficient or an appropriate amount of job skills training for skills in a certain area for people who live in that area to be able to have jobs in their neighborhoods, right? Or we need more jobs to come to our neighborhood. We need a specific type of development in our neighborhood. So again, we're not just looking at housing, although all these we need to put on kind of our fair housing assessment glasses. So we're looking at fair housing, but beyond housing, how are we impacted by education? How is housing impacted by education? How is where you live determining the your environmental quality of the place that you live? Are you limited to by the number of bedrooms in your household? Do you not have a full kitchen? Is it the quality of the housing that you're living in that's a challenge? We're trying to determine what are our greatest challenges and what are your ideas for overcoming some of those obstacles and challenges. So trying to find out ideas from the community, programs that already exist that need support and that need funding, trying to support what we already have established, and then trying to determine what are the gaps, what are we missing when we look at housing, when we look at education, when we look at employment. What have we not identified? Transportation is another area. So if you look at the sheet that I passed out, one of the sheet has a lot of different questions on it, and it's some of the questions that we're asking community leaders and stakeholders And if you are interested in participating in the AFH, there's several ways that you can do that. But answering some of these questions and really sharing your thoughts, that was something I was hoping you might be willing to do today. So if you look at some of the, I also have some pens if anyone needs a pen. But if you were able to fill out a couple of these questions and give your opinion and give your thoughts and ideas to where we're lacking in some of these different areas, we'd really be able to take those back and put them into the data that we're collecting to be able to say, okay, this group of stakeholders has identified these different issues in these areas, and it can play into creating, the strategies and goals. And then once we have this information collected and we've designated strategies and goals, we're coming back to you this fall and into early January with a copy of the draft of our ideas for here's the goals the strategies that have been identified, the goals behind those strategies, and here are the problems that we're trying to address. So we have to prioritize what are our issues, right? How are we going to address those issues? And then we're going to ask for community feedback again. Is this what you said? Is this how you want us to address the issues that you brought up and you brought to our attention as priorities? And then that goes into, again, this federal document where every 5 years we're required to show progress as to how we, had programs that are implemented. We have the different types of planning documents that incorporate these ideas that came from the community. So it's really the first time the federal government is asking us to be accountable for when they say we want to further fair housing, what that looks like. And so it's really an important time for the community to give feedback, and we very much appreciate any information that you'd like to share when it comes to that. The other document I handed out, this is just kind of some basic information about what the AFFH is, which I just gave you a little background on, but it also has our website. We thought one of the easiest ways for people to find out what's been collected thus far and have access to maps that show this data that I've been talking about when I'm talking about the federal data created by HUD. We can actually look at maps that tell us these different, we can look at who owns a house and who rents a house and the school proficiency levels that we're seeing in different neighborhoods. You can actually look at maps that show all of those things on this website. So
do I have locations or lots and lots?
It doesn't have the parcels broken out. It's only in census tracts. So when HUD creates maps, it's based on federal information, so it's only by census tract. We have some of those things. So we've been trying to incorporate, again, that local information, that local data, and the information we're pulling from neighborhoods. So on this website, not only will you find maps that were created by HUD, but you will also find, Manny actually created a few maps for us, so you'll find some of the maps that he was able to look at more specifically in areas that we call RECAP areas, and those stand for racially and or ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. So those are census tracts where we have over 50% of the population living in the census tract is non-white, and in addition, 40% or more of the persons living in the census tract are living at the federal poverty guideline. So when we look at the different areas in Omaha and the different census tracts that are part of those RECAP areas, those are one of our specific focuses, is trying to figure out, okay, we have the same issues, right? When we put those, we have a map of those RECAPs, and we actually have a map up there of the 1932 redlining map from Omaha, and you can see that those same areas, and this is no surprise to anybody here, but those same areas are the same areas that we're going to find in those RECAP areas, right? So it's getting more specific to what is going on in that we need to address to start making some changes so that we are assisting and providing the correct type of support to these census tracts to help raise that level of the quality of housing and also income levels in those neighborhoods, job, employment, school proficiency in those neighborhoods. So those are really, our focus area, and that's why I reached out to Juanita, because when we look at 24th Street corridor, it's in that RECAP area, right? So it's one of the census tracts, and so we're reaching out to every single neighborhood leader that's in those RECAP census tracts, and we're going up to any of the neighborhood meetings that are willing to have us, and trying to, again, get input from people living in those neighborhoods and finding out what have you seen that works, what doesn't work, do you have ideas, how can we work together? So trying to engage the community in finding strategies and goals that will work for Omaha, not just what the federal government suggests that we do, right? So your neighborhood knows what your neighborhood needs more than anybody else. And so just trying to get that input. So you'll find maps on the website. You're going to find information. We have our survey on the website. There's an online survey you can take. It takes about 8 to 10 minutes. If you're not an online person, I did bring a couple physical copies of the survey. So if you'd like to grab one from me after, I have my card as well, and I can get those, make sure that you can get it back to me. So we are just, again, here to let you know that this is what we're working on. Our final copy of this document is due to HUD in April of next year, but we are, we're right now is the time where community voices need to be heard. We want to make sure that the information on that sheet with those questions, if you have time now to just take a couple minutes, if I pass out some pens, would that be okay for you, Juanita?
Yeah, that would be
Pass
great.
out some pens, and if you want to try to answer any of those questions, but also feel free to go onto the website and take a full survey. Like I said, it takes about 8 to 10 minutes. So if you just take a couple minutes and look at that piece of paper, if anybody needs a pen, I can get that for you. Pen there. Anybody else? Can sell it? And while we're working on that, does anyone have any specific questions? I know that, again, I don't have my presentation, so I wanted to make sure. Does anybody else need a pen?
Well,
But I wanted to make sure I hit some of the key areas. So,
Well, Mary, this really sounds like an excellent opportunity for neighborhood residents to really play an active part in having a voice, unlike previous years in trying to address poverty. But as we were in a similar meeting like this with city planning with Jim Anderson, we raised the issue of, since we are in a poor neighborhood, many of our residents really don't have access to the internet.
right.
So when you're posting your meetings that you're doing, they're not really informed.
Yes.
And if we're really going to get a good look at what the needs are,
Right.
how are we going to address getting to those individuals?
Right. So one of the things that we've been doing is obviously creating different flyers for our community meetings. So we've had community engagement meetings. We've had stakeholder meetings. We've done open houses. We did one here. Trying to provide a forum for people to come and who might not be either interested in doing things on the internet or internet savvy, but also for people that might not have access, right, to be able to come to meetings. We've been posting those in public areas. So I know that we went and flagged different businesses and things like that for one of the meetings. It's not the most effective way to do it, and I realize that. We're now recognizing that, okay, so we've had these, we wanted to make sure we had forums all over the city, but now we're trying to go to other people's meetings. So we were at, Native Omaha Days. We're going to specific neighborhood meetings, like I said, the individual meetings. One of the reasons why I'm here, I want to make sure that we're getting the word out other places besides on Facebook or having a website. Because I agree with you. It's not the most effective way. Unfortunately, we don't have a person at the city whose number one job is to be in communications, and that's actually a job that they created.
That should be one of the number one jobs of the city is communicating with the people.
Absolutely, and that's what I'm saying. But they actually just created a position to actually be able to be our mouthpiece. Because in the past, the way it's worked is that there's been someone from each different department or division that has gone out and then engaged with the public, but not one person's job. Which I agree with you. I think that it makes more sense to have someone whose main focus is how are we going to reach the community in a way that is best for the community, right? So those things are much further behind than they should be, but they are in some ways being addressed. We are now, like I said, we're trying to go to where people are instead of asking people to come to us. So we hope that in going to where people are, that will be another way that we can engage people that aren't online. It's a tough thing to be able to make sure we hear everybody's voice, and we aren't. This community engagement period has not been short. We've extended it because we want to make certain that we feel like we hear everyone. Hopefully that answers a little bit of that.
Mr. I have a question. I have a question.
Juanita,
Juanita.
I'm sorry.
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
My comments that I make aren't going to be addressed to you. It's going to be addressed to your position.
Sure. Of course.
How long have you been with the city?
I've only been with the city for 9 months, so
Network for Holistic Recovery, the organization that is it's a profit organization that develops communication lines within the traditional African American community, which has 40 years of experience in this area right here. One of the members is the 24th and Lake Merchants Association,
okay.
who has been an advocate for the maintenance of the cultural significance of this area for over 40 years. Okay? You have identified all of the key areas of concern, which for all practical purposes would be good, but in this case it's not.
Okay.
Because you can't have a district that was developed based upon racism and discrimination. You know what I mean when I say that?
Oh, absolutely. It was federally. Yeah, there are federal guidelines that brought us to segregation and poverty, and those same federal entities are now trying to address those. So yeah, I understand if that's what you're saying. This was a federal law that segregated a community that is now trying to address the same issue.
The law of 1913.
Okay.
Is that the one you're speaking of?
Yes, sir.
Okay. When the concept of community block grant was launched in the 70s, that's when the so-called rehabilitation and development of this area was to take place.
Sure.
The city was given that responsibility to do that.
Right.
As you stated, only up until this point did they have a mechanism of communication.
Right.
In a meeting 2 weeks ago downtown, it was identified by the gentleman that put on the program that they testify that it's been well over 30 years since the neighborhood organizations in this area have been operational enough to be proficient. In other words, 70% of the neighborhood organizations that are identified in the directory over the last 30 years are non-operative.
Okay.
Okay? But that has not stopped community block grant money from coming in here.
Sure.
Without the understanding and the support and the involvement of the stakeholders, which are federally identified through neighborhood organizations.
Right.
Now that the gentrification has already occurred in this area, the program strategy appears to be, let's get together and make this thing right.
Okay.
But the ones who have been affected by it and the ones who have created the atmosphere have not received that type of justice. It is almost impossible to acquire the documentation from the community block grant through HUD or whoever to see how that money has been used historically over the last 40 years. I think that it is imperative that the neighborhood organizations in this area see how the money that was originally dropped based upon the obvious circumstances were used, and if they were used correctly.
Sure.
You also identified that a lot of people think that HUD money is just based up, community block grant money is just based upon neighborhood development. But it covers all the areas,
Oh, yeah.
health, education, all of those kinds of things, which contribute to the circumstances that have affected those who have been identified as those who need those resources.
And I'm, just to clarify, I'm not just talking about CDBG dollars. I'm talking about ESG, TIF. I'm talking about all the federal funding that goes towards housing. So yeah, we're not just talking community block grant.
But community block grant money was the Pacific money that was identified to rectify a wrong.
Right.
Those dollars have never been identified to this community on how they're being used.
Right.
Or if they're being used.
Right.
Or if they're being used. That's been the question that's been.
Well,
Yes.
how and how they're doing now, presently, correct.
Sure.
I think that it is absolutely essential to get the kind of participation that is needed in this area, that the historical misuse of those monies be identified,
Sure.
so that we don't repeat the same mistakes. Because you can't talk about an area that has been identified in its conception as being segregated and a place for those who were not accepted by the general market community, of which 85% of that usually comes out of the political government of this town, to participate in a program that is to enhance what we perceive as the gentrification that has already occurred in this area.
Sure.
The population has been relinquished because people have moved out of here because it has not been beneficial, and the World Herald and all these other places have testified that particularly blacks, young, they have moved out of here because it's not beneficial to them. All right? The needs, based upon this being one of the only hub zones in the state, must obviously still be here. But no one ever identifies what's being done to rectify that wrong. That needs to happen before anything else, particularly as applies to asking stakeholders who have traditionally lived here to support a concept in itself that has not been totally written, because there are still organizations in this community whose names are being used as developing operations that the neighborhood organizations don't know anything about.
Okay.
There's a lot of wrongs that need to be right before any types of support from this community even should be asked for.
Okay. I appreciate that and I respect it. And what you're asking for is transparency, and I think that that's a reasonable request. Obviously, I don't speak on behalf of the department, and I can't speak to all of the things that have happened. Obviously, I'm very new to the city. What I can tell you is we have some new leadership that I'm encouraged about, and I hope that we can come to a point at which those conversations happen. And I do understand and appreciate that it's a lot for me to come in here and ask for this information, but I want to make sure that your voices are heard, because if they aren't, then who speaks for the community? And so what I can do is give you an opportunity to answer these questions and to share this information so that we can add it to our report and take those things into account, and try to make strategies and goals that are based on that information and have you hold me to it. I can only speak for myself and my own work and the project that I'm working on. I unfortunately can't speak to the rest of how our community block grant dollars are allocated, but I believe you and I hear you, and I just wanted to acknowledge I'm listening. Unfortunately, I don't have all those answers. And
Can you get those answers?
I can talk to my supervisor and share what you shared with me today, but I know that they're aware that there is concern, and I believe in the leadership that is there. I believe that there are folks that care.
For your own benefit, not to put you in a hot seat,
Sure.
we have been asking for copies of the dollars that have been spent over the last, since 1970, of community block grant money in this area, and we have not received it yet. And we've been asking for that for how long, Mr. Tyler?
30 years.
How long?
40 years.
40 years?
30 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that again isn't something that I have access to.
Can
So unfortunately, I can't speak to that issue or the conversations that have been around that. But I'm here. I hear you, and I'm not going to argue that with you. It seems like a request that, you know, I understand why you need to make that request, and I don't know who makes those decisions to share that information or who doesn't. Again, I can only speak to my own work and the initiative I'm in the process of doing, but I understand that would be very frustrating. If it was in my neighborhood, my community, I get what you're saying. And so I acknowledge that, and I wish I could give you a better answer here.
So we have Chris here with city planning. Can you speak to how we could have access to the CDBG funding, those breakdowns that Elijah is talking about? How do we ask for that? How do we make that request known
Well,
from the department?
there's really not a lot I can add that Meredith hasn't already spoken to. And I think one of the very important things that she did say is that we have some new leadership and staff that I think really want to increase transparency, and I know that there's an effort underway to compile that information in a way that is transmittable and understandable to the general public. I know that it's been compiled over the years and presented to HUD and as a result of various requests. But it's clear that that information isn't in a format that's been generally presented and presentable and understandable and clear to the community. And I think that's something that we are working on and want to increase in transparency. And I think there is misunderstandings in both directions to some degree. Because I think, yes, I think part of it is kind of the bureaucratic structure that the federal government requires and the reporting that it requires versus a format and presentation of the information that's really understandable to the layperson and to the community. So, and then I think that's created a sense that within the community that the funds haven't been spent within the community to an extent that isn't quite representative of what's actually happened. But I think that's our responsibility to be able to present to you what actually has happened so we can make it clear the way the money's been spent.
Come on, it is so easy to present. Habitat for Humanity received X amount of dollars for these three things to do. Omaha Economic Development Corporation received X amount of dollars to do 1, 2, and 3. And there's 20 other organizations that are receiving these money, and it's easy to list the dollars and simply don't say the public doesn't understand.
No, I said it hasn't
Simple
been presented in a
language.
way. I don't think it's been presented in a way that's really,
Right. Well, you can present it like this, right here on a paper.
Madam Chairman, can we have some order?
Can I, yeah.
We have a hand here, and then we have a statement here, and then a statement here, and then a statement here, and then we're going to have to close off so
Thank
that
you.
we can speak to I'm sorry, can't think of your name.
Dawn. And I think what the findings I have can also really contribute to this conversation.
Okay, so we're going to go in that order, and then we're going to, and I'm sorry, then we have one other hand here, and then we're going to cut this debate off, and then if we can, Chris, if we can meet one-on-one with you to explore this further if we don't capture it here now. Sure. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, I just sit Carl Tyler because if I gave my history, we're the founders of this bill under the Blue Lines, and the community put this together. And I hate coming to these meetings and keep talking about what happened 40 years ago. But we are the ones who put this whole building together. A man named Mr. Andy Wright. We had 14 neighborhood groups here. And we started with none, but we created them ourselves. It was bringing in $5.5 million for 15 years. We got involved in the 7th year, and we created all that you see here. And that was it. My problem with when you said, ma'am, that you got new leadership, the problem is that if you're going to be new leadership, then you need to come and send instead of sitting you.
Yes, sir.
And just hold up. And then, because we work with Marty Schufer. Marty Schufer is one of the youngest planners in this whole country. and we sit here and right in these meetings, we were here. We didn't have to worry about that, this new word transparency. We were sitting at the table, we knew what was going on. So when you come in and tell me that if the person is right, that he ought to be here instead of you. And I'm not saying, I don't care if he called one up on 40th Street. We're talking about 24th and Lake Street. So he need to come and address the people here. And I always tell people, I don't speak for those folks who have it. I'm a street brother, and I speak for poor folks. So that's where I'm at. So we need to so since you know all this stuff, you need to tell him that, just tell him that Madam Chairman, that I'm requesting that he come here, and since we have this beautiful center, work with you to set it up so we can have a community meeting with the planning director.
All right, Mr. Woodman.
My comment was just, a reaction to an understanding of the format and used to say. So I'm going to defer on that.
Okay.
Okay. Referring to someone's question about studying Omaha, North Omaha. We've been doing that for years. 20 years ago, they brought in the enterprise zone, which kind of shook everybody up, and we're going to do this, but then it was only, all of a sudden it faded. And there was nothing said to us where the money went and how it was spent or whatever. But they did a real push. I think they were trying to get data for their reports so they could get more money. They were kind of using the community. So we met all over North and South Omaha. And that's what happened. We gave our input, but it just fizzled.
We got one more over here, then Mary, you can go ahead and close out.
Thank you.
So, I'm sorry, we have one first and then you have your
Okay, I'd like to state that, first and foremost, that we hear that there's new leadership, and it doesn't appear to be leadership, it appears to be new management. And there's a distinct difference between leadership and management. A manager manages what's going on, and a leader provides vision. And the vision that's needed for North Omaha, how can there be a vision for North Omaha if there's no one in North Omaha in there giving the vision? We don't need anyone to come down here and provide a vision for us. We are intelligent enough to provide our own vision. And we need to be sitting at the table when the vision is declared and crystallized. Because if we're not at the table, then there's no vision for us. We have the vision that's put in our mind like a move from someone else who has played that out. And now they are managing and not providing leadership. The problem that we're here now is because there is an absence of leadership. And because that absence of leadership is providing a void. And that void is causing irreparable harm to the babies and unfold. As they say, there's people been here for 40 years asking for the same thing. That's unacceptable. Unacceptable. Totally. So to come and say that there's new leadership and there's no leaders, and we're not sitting at the table where leaders are at, then we cannot voluntarily give up our future for someone who's consistently comes down and say they're providing leadership for us. We're not babies. We're not babies. And, if you look at the history of not only African Americans, we'll find that Paragus was taught by us. All the ancients were taught by us. So to say that we're incapable to comprehend something is totally irrefutable. Totally. So it would be incumbent on those who have the position and the power to make changes to come down as opposed to sitting surrogates. Because when they sit in surrogates, they can't give the answers that are needed, as this lady attempted to do. But she can't move this conversation forward because she doesn't have the equipment or the armament or the war chest to do it. So we need someone down here who has access to the war chest and the treasure chest. Because if we don't have access to the war chest or the treasure chest, we're spinning our wheels. And this whole thing is down the void. And I was in the Navy. And in the Navy, I worked as damage control. And when we did damage control, there was a crack in the bulkhead. The crack ran straight down. And the way you stop the crack is to drill a hole at the base of the crack. And when you drill that hole at the base of the crack, it no longer can permeate. So we need to start drilling holes at the base of the crack, because what we are hearing are consistently long-running cracks, and those days are OVER. We're like my brother Carl said, 40 years. And, you know, we need to be at the table. That's my thought on this.
Okay, so what I'm about to say, I mean, in all due respect, I'm one of the youngest ones in this room, besides Juan. And I would just say this, that at this time, I feel that there's a lot of disconnect when it comes to the neighborhood associations. And I would say, for one, is that I was not invited to this meeting. As a president of North Omaha Neighborhood Alliance, I should have received an invite to this meeting, not hear by word of mouth. So again, until we come together and say we're going to work together, we cannot expect for anyone to say, let's bring them down to the table. Because number one, we can't work together and say, let's get together and do everything. You guys have been doing this for 40 years. I'm only 38 years old. So you've been doing this longer than I've been living. I see the passion and I see the work that can be done. But again, we have to somehow let the newer generation in and say, you know what, this is our home too. I've grown up here. This is my home. North Omaha is my home. I love North Omaha, and I will fight for North Omaha. But if I can't be invited to the meetings to see what's going on in North Omaha, then don't expect for me to be able to fight for North Omaha when I go down there and sit at the mayor's office, with Meredith, with NUSA, bringing things to North Omaha. I sat on this board, on the committee with Meredith. I was the only African American, am I right or wrong, Meredith, that sat on that board, sat on that committee. Not one time have I been called and said, hey, can you come to our neighborhood meetings? I should not have to say, oh, that's a meeting going on, let me attend it.
Can I address that?
We can't have that.
Can I please address that?
So I was not invited. I have several emails, and I was very offended, and now I am here. Now, and it's to see this. I really want to see us do something here. It has to happen. So everybody has to let go of whatever happened in the past. It has to be let go because there's new people that truly want to come in and help. And if I'm not going to be accepted to help, then maybe I won't attend again.
Thank you.
Thank you for that information. Meredith, you were going to conclude, and then we're going to
I
have...
just wanted to kind of summarize real fast. Thank you for sharing with me that information. I'm grateful to be here and hearing it. What I will say is I'm only talking about this one project, which is called the AFFH. I didn't come to address CDBG funds and how those are spent. I understand the request for that, and that seems reasonable to me, absolutely. But if I was coming to address that issue, you're right. It would have been, and when I say leadership, I mean my leadership, not yours. I don't by any means think that the person who leads my office should be your leader. I don't. And I wasn't trying to suggest that. I was just saying the person who makes the decisions in my division, that person is the person that has to answer those questions. But I'm not here talking about those things. I'm not here to address, I didn't get sent here to talk about CDBG dollars. I was here to talk about the AFFH, which is, I'm a person working on this project. I'm one of the leaders working on this project specifically. So I work with Michelle on this, I work with several other people. So I'm only addressing an initiative, I'm not addressing the issues of the city planning department. I just want to make that really clear. So they wouldn't have sent me to address that, because you're right, I have not put in the time or tenure or have the experience to know that. So I just want to make that real clear. And in addition, I really appreciate anybody that filled that information out. I appreciate being invited here. I just want to let you know what we're up to, and you can follow it on our website. I just want to remind you that it's on that little piece of paper with all the information. Our website's there. If you don't have access to the internet, I'm going to leave my card. Please feel free to call me. I'll make sure to personally update you. I will make a phone call. I will come to your house and drop off a packet of information, whatever it is, to keep you abreast of what we decide to do. So you will be notified, and the reason why we're doing this project and the reason why it is being required and why the Obama administration put this initiative in place is because they want to hold people accountable. So I want to be a mechanism to help do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dewan Hayes. I'm the communications manager here at the union, and I stress the communications part. That's a big center of conflict, is communication. Where are we getting our information from? How how does anyone, just anyone on the street, know about what anyone else does? So recently there was two journalists that are part of a network called LifeWire that have traveled the United States, helping communities conduct general assessments of information flow. This assessment is by no means telling people how they get information, what their information is, and how that community works, but they conduct 15 one-hour interviews with stakeholders of that community and ask, how do you connect? Where do people learn about your organization or your initiatives, or et cetera? And so this report was then compiled into a 27-page assessment, kind of giving an overall introduction and interviews, and then some key findings and some suggestions on how those can be addressed. So I'll kind of just read some parts of the report, and then I'll give also some of my own feedback. So in August of 2017, staff members of the Listening Post Collective visited North Omaha to talk with residents about the news and information environment in their part of the city. This information ecosystem assessment set out to explore which issues are most important to local people and how connected residents feel to sources that keep them informed about city life and the policies that affect them. It goes on to assess the Star, the World Herald, the current outlets that we have. This assessment is prefaced, though. This assessment is not meant to be an exhaustive conclusion about information flow with Omaha. Rather, it is designed to share insights from stakeholders about how the city's Black community is covered and informed by local media, and to provide a snapshot of media and information flow in the city. And so there's an interview about demographics, lots of information that we generally know about lack of access or communication, as well as representation in current media, say the World Herald. Information needs. So I'll give you some of the questions that they asked. I was one of the participants amongst 14 others. What's a recent news story about North Omaha that you felt didn't get covered enough? How does North Omaha traditionally get covered by local media? What community spaces, physical and online, do people in North Omaha access to get and share information? So it's really about where's the grapevine? What is that grapevine, and how do people get a hold of that? Answers. We heard time and again that one of the largest information gaps in North Omaha is around local government. One person said that there's a lack of information around the political landscape of Omaha as a whole, and poor civics education in the area. This person pointed to this information gap as a reason for low voter turnout. Quote, that's why we always have the low average voter turnout, because there isn't a connection to the political realm, as well as a lack of understanding of what those people can do for the people of North Omaha, the person said. Another spoke to suggest that civics isn't taught to kids or youth in North Omaha, and that more effort needs to be made to ensure kids understand their rights. This person said that the people in North Omaha need to be informed about how local and national policy decisions will affect their community, pointing to cuts by the Trump administration to social welfare via the budget and healthcare reform as an example. Beyond physics, one of the major themes that emerged was the need to better coverage of issues relevant to daily life. Poor road conditions and other infrastructure issues came up often. Folks are looking for increased coverage of these problems, but also investigation and explanation as to why they happen more often in North Omaha than the rest of the city. There's an assessment of the information landscape, including the World Herald, the Star, the Reader, and low-power radio stations 101.3 and 95.7 The Boss, and what those assets are. I will have my card at the end of this, and I will loudly email this to everyone. I was able to print off all 27 pages for each person, but this is a phenomenal resource.
Can we get a hold of the resource?
Yes. I'll have my card available, and we can figure out how to get you a copy of this, because I've read it and I'm incredibly intrigued. And so production and movement. There's a reflection on a number of respondents to our questions while covering issues of issues related to North Omaha have improved since Warren Buffett purchased the World Herald. The tendency, though, is still to print if it leads type stories, focusing on violence and crime. The paper was also singled out for 2 specific pieces of journalism. First was a series in 2007 called Omaha Black and White that highlighted the disparities between North Omaha and the rest of the city. That was shared as an example of insightful deep dive reporting that led to larger conversations and even some action when a group of religious organizations toured the Deep South to explore racism and rights. But most people we spoke to said there hasn't been any similar in-depth reporting about North Omaha since that series was published. So continuing that in-depth reporting, having we have one lead. What's going on beyond that, and is the community taking hold of that narrative rather than someone on the outside coming in and evaluating an assessment, and telling the community what problems may be. The second piece of journalism that was referenced multiple times was a recent story about Nico Jenkins. When he was caught, the World Herald published a pictorial with 38 members of his extended family who had been convicted of crimes. One person surveyed said that anyone in North Omaha who with those last names felt stigmatized by that coverage. These headlines impact how people feel about the community. Even if you weren't personally one of the people, it's still an internalization that you make about the community that you're in. Am I now in an unsafer space because this person was identified as a criminal of some sort? Dynamic of access. One of the most insightful conversations during a visit was with a community leader in North Omaha who broke down how younger Black Omahans get their information. They divided North Omaha into 3 groups: Black professionals, activists, and community connectors, and folks working hard to simply make ends meet. The person said upward mobility with young Black Omaha allies itself with professional organizations like the Urban League of Young Black Professionals. This group sticks to mainstream media information, reading the World Herald, the Star, social media, and some radio. The next group was identified as the activist conscious, Black community members who might have gone to college, although not all did, and that are a little more underground. They said this group is an active conduit of community information, putting out useful information to the community through radio programs, live events like hip-hop shows, community posters and flyers, and booths at local events. The last and largest group of North Omaha residents is mostly connected to community information via word of mouth and social media. Maybe they're hearing news from their peers, a barbershop, a gas station, something like that. Maybe they see a flyer because we're still a city that puts flyers and posters and passes them out. So you see where there's tiers of people who are activated and where they seek their information. And typically the young professionals are college educated, so there's a focus on literacy and ability to think I need as many sources as possible in order to make an informed decision. And when many people don't even have those sources readily available, where's that action? Why would I care about AFFH if I don't even really know about the condition of my neighborhood or why that condition was created in the first place? Impact of information. Just about everyone we spoke to with mentioned that impact local media has had on the perception and identity of North Omaha. The neighborhood, the area has historically been covered in a one-dimensional way that practice continues today. It's pretty much a negative perception of what happens here. That perception gets into the thought process of everybody, whether you're white, black, whatever. Everybody learns to buy into the perception of North Omaha being a place that you do not want to go to at night. Some people tell you don't want to even go in the daytime. People we spoke with were working to change this perception, but many feel the media is working against those efforts. Our media doesn't help us because often they play right to the stereotypes, one resident said. In reference to the World Herald, someone said, it is a good paper, but it's historically complicit with a lot of racism that happened here and enforced it with the narrative that was created. They said it's a real battle to get the media to cover community in a positive light. If there's going to be a story, it's going to be about a shooting in North Omaha. If there's going to be a story, it's going to be about how it's this black kid that got up in North Omaha. Look at how tough it is here. That's the narrative. As opposed to, we have beautiful sunny days and people playing in the park and community gardens and people are working really hard so their children can go to dance classes and summer clubs, and humans working their hardest to make something of their situation rather than, oh, look at all the blight that we have laying around. Darn. And a lot of this information then affects one of the most compelling issues that arose during discussions was the beginnings of gentrification in the area. There's a feeling that while it hasn't happened yet, gentrification and displacement are inevitable. This is largely tied to the neighborhood's proximity to downtown. As young people begin to move back into downtown Omaha, rents are rising, and developers are looking for ways to expand downtown. North Omaha is one of the only underdeveloped areas where this expansion can happen. Process has already begun along the border of downtown and the north side. One person told us about the rebranding of this area. There's now an area called Nodo, north of downtown. It's North Omaha, but realtors don't want to call it that because of the negative association with North Omaha. Information, or lack thereof, will play a major role in how development, gentrification, displacement in North Omaha will play out. Speaking about gentrification, one person told us that they want to know how it happens, is who is a part of the conversation, and who knows that information and what are they using it for. This is a testament of. For myself, I have thought of the difference between gentrification and revitalization is communication. Who is at the table and who has the information and who is able to act upon it. If the people within an area aren't equipped with information in order to be a part of their community, it's much easier to displace because there's no social tie, there's no real connection for you there because you weren't acting anyway. Who was? So this goes to play into social trust. According to one community activist we spoke to, the biggest barrier to creating a more trusted information flow is for local media to spend more time in the neighborhood. It's a lack of connection between them as people, or as an organization, or as a business in the neighborhood, in the homes, with everyday struggling poor working class people. That there's a complete disconnection. Part of the struggle of creating more lasting connection is there aren't enough reporters on the scene to have trust relationship within the community, which leads to there's a ton more information that I'm going to skip over that it goes into like chunks and really breaks up and gives some hyper specifics, and I'll go straight to the key findings. Key findings are information flow in North Omaha is very grassroots, but there are not a lot of formal media outlets that have a grassroots approach to engaging North Omaha. North Omaha residents don't just want to see their community covered more often, they want to see depth to the reporting and sustained interest in topics like affordable housing, local jobs, infrastructure, school policy, criminal justice issues, local arts, and community investment and development. In addition to in-depth reporting around ongoing issues, community members need more information that they can use in their day-to-day lives. North Omahans are open to the Omaha Star being a continued media resource for the local Black community, but it would need to expand its role beyond its current focus of editorial and promotional content, and include more news and information reflecting current realities in the neighborhood. One respondent said, if the Omaha Star wants to survive, it needs to be handed over to some younger people. If local media outlets want regular efforts, like The Reader does, to cover issues related to North Omaha, people will respond by consuming that news. There's a feeling amongst young North Omaha residents that given the choice, it's best to leave the neighborhood. This has led to a lack of younger talent pushing the neighborhood forward or preparing to take over for an older generation of community gatekeepers. There is a generational divide in North Omaha, particularly around how information is shared and consumed. There's a need for consistent and trusted information that bridges that divide. There's a growing concern by local residents that North Omaha is going to change fundamentally in the coming decade. People are worried that a combination of outsiders buying up both rental properties and vacant property and land in North Omaha and new housing development will price them out of their traditional neighborhoods. Anyone who leaves Omaha today and comes back in 15 years, North Omaha is going to be all white instead of one long-time community member. The North Omaha diaspora is influential, diverse, and growing as gentrification grows in scope. Community members who left for school and careers still feel an attachment to the area they grew up in and participate through North Omaha gatherings in their new cities or via Facebook groups. Also, a growing number of people are being displaced in the periphery of Omaha and want to maintain ties with their traditional communities. And there are some new community resources being developed in North Omaha, citing 101.3, 75 North, the Union for Contemporary Art, that can be accessed and utilized as ways to stimulate information flow in the neighborhood. They give us some suggestions and insights as to current methods programs that are working in other cities and ways that we could maybe reflect the same model. And then lastly, suggestions. News bulletin. North Omahans could benefit from a hyperlocal news initiative that is a platform agnostic and gives residents a rundown of what they need to know about their community every week in print, as an email newsletter, online, on the radio, and even distributed via text message.
Hallelujah.
This straightforward news bulletin would cover essential topics like housing, education, healthcare, jobs, civics, safety, and more. Existing community-minded media, including the Reader, the Omaha Star, and community radio station 101.3 FM, could help disseminate the news bulletin as an insert or read the weekly rundown on the radio, both as news sharing, but also to stimulate on-air conversation by hosts and listeners. So everyone has the same baseline of information wherever you're coming from. You're getting a printed newsletter, you find the bulletin at the fair deal, you heard it on the radio, you're getting it somewhere. So that conversation is constantly going, and everyone has at least the same page to start from. A community engagement aspect of the project would include sharing news bulletin in key community locations, local parks on weekends, monthly community events, neighborhood association meetings, church services, as pamphlet inserts. A similar poster-sized printout of this news could be placed at local libraries, community centers, and businesses, barbershops, restaurants, gas stations, interested in partnering with the project. There could also be a digital focus, including Facebook groups, Twitter, and an email newsletter. Ideally, this bulletin would be produced weekly by a paid community reporter and a few assistants. And then in-depth story investigation. Another focus would make sense to take an in-depth, long-term reporting approach to one topic and enlist the community's help in investigating it. That way, folks feel like they have consistent buy-in into a conversation and can support that, and that there's a collective community narrative rather than, oh, the World Herald wrote about poverty and that's what our narrative is and we will adopt that. It's the community taking hold of that directly.
We need to get a grant of about $500,000 a year
Would you let him complete?
to do that.
Would you hold up?
Well,
Okay.
so that's a part of a lot of their suggestions actually come out of it starts with very little funding, but much more focus on training and general conversation in order to. There are lots of people who have interest in reporting these stories. Some people don't even know that they're reporters and do it on a regular basis. But they aggregate news and like, hey, this is what I heard, this is what I know, this is where I was at this meeting. Let me relay this information on to you. Myself, as a communication manager, I do as hard as I can to use as many methods as possible to connect people to our mission and what's going on here. And so, the question of, do you know what the Union for Contemporary Art is? Like, what in a face? We know that. I know that art can be a vehicle of change and can be used to bring people together, but not everyone has that as a priority in their minds. And it is up to me and the community as a whole to show that we have the ability to work together and use our arts and our talents and our abilities to develop and strengthen our neighborhoods and our communities. And so, this all comes to say there's additional thoughts, there's more information, there's conclusion in the process, and the folks that were interviewed. So you can get your own perspective on that and read that, collect it. But something that Precious and I had actually talked about a few months ago in our first meeting was a North Omaha newsletter. And that assessment gave me great. We already thought it was a good idea, but there was someone from the outside who was like, hey, we talked to a lot of people and there needs to be a consistent baseline of, knowing about this 24th Street Corridor meeting, know about NONA meetings or any other neighborhood association, knowing that you have a neighborhood association.
Yes, definitely.
A lot of people don't even know, they may have lived in an area for most of their lives and don't even know that it has a name and that there's a significance and what the historical significance of that area is. As well as, there are a number of organizations and groups like the Boys and Girls Club and Girls Inc. that have events for youth and for families to come out and participate and engage. There's neighborhood associations who have block parties and events to get their community out and have that rapport and be able to share that. But if you don't know, if you don't have a place to go get that information. If you're not online and you didn't get it in the mail, I guess you'll hope you see it. You know, there was the Grand Culture Fest on 24th Street. It blocked off the whole street, and it was meant to be a big deal, but a lot of people didn't know about it because it was limited to flyers and social media. If you're not in that place or you're not online, you didn't know. And there's far too many people I heard that were like, I had no idea this existed. So, and to address like grants with the neighborhood alliance, there's ways that we can apply for city funding to that go to alliance to address these issues. There are also a number of journalistic-based foundations that advocate for community-supported journalism to help. To pay for a journalism student to work at the Star, and to have a beat that they're out on the street talking to people about every day. Or they're going to the city council meetings and then having a digest that people can okay, what happened there? And that there's some reference compared to, well, if you go online, you look at the minutes and you scroll down the minutes and you get to the part where they're talking about something that applies to you, then maybe you'll find out about the information. And then in about 2 weeks you can go back and maybe follow up. And then, oh wait, you just missed the public hearing, so you can't even voice your opinion. That's where that disconnect comes from. Because every election, there's always said, well, North Omaha just doesn't turn out. They just don't. Come on, y'all lazy, get up. And it's like, no, if you don't have any reason or any information in your life to inform your decisions about wanting to engage and participate, and why voting should be even relevant to you, why would you? Or know where your polling place is and just have that in the back of your mind always. And so I've been talking to Precious. I'm arranging a meeting with Joanna LaFleur because she does her email news. She does an email newsletter about people's events on Facebook. She's like, give me your events. Send me all your info. I want previews for your next month so I can get that information out. We want to try to digest that into, here's a print that comes out at least bi-weekly if we had to start it there. And then you get an email newsletter you can subscribe to. If you're on Facebook, you'll get it there. If not, you can find it at the Fair Deal or Afro-American bookshop or at your church, and it'll be in a place for you to engage with, so that you know what meetings you can go to, you know where you can take your kids, and you know that this survey is happening and that you can participate in that.
Thank you. I'll have to call the meeting now.
Yeah, certainly.
Good info, man.
Thank you.
Thank you, brother.
Can we get that
Can I ask a question? May I have a question?
Yes, but
What's
it's
that?
like,
Oh, I think you're going to conclude the meeting.
well, just 1 second. You have a question?
I have hopefully a yes or no answer, not locking you into a yes or no, but hopefully yes or no, and then a short thing on the communications. Do you think that the gentrification has taken place in this town?
Yes.
And?
Yes.
Oh, you asking that for all of us?
No, I just wanted it from him. That's fine. I'm surprised at his answer. Then, in the year 2017, understanding the nature of communication and understanding the historical lack thereof, how will any meaningful communication mechanism be put in place that will identify the historical wrong so that community block grant money can be used in that kind of time period?
I think because we all recognize it as a problem, and gentrification doesn't happen once and then that's the end of it. It's a continual process. So that process can consistently be informed by more communication and information, which the citizens and the people of that area can be empowered to do something about it.
Putting that apparatus together, what I mean, do you really realistically think that an apparatus can be put together to begin to correct that?
Yes.
By print?
By print, by word of mouth, by more social events. by having a place where people are engaging directly with each other and that exchange information, I believe that it can be informed in order to determine the direction of gentrification into revitalization, where the people are in control of that, certainly.
All right, so I'm going to restate the mission for 24th Street Corridor Alliance, and that is to bring a cohesiveness with businesses and residents that are along the corridor. So all invitations are received by those that are impacted by the 24th Street corridor. So if someone has a business along the corridor, or they have a neighborhood that is connected to the corridor, then they are given an invite to attend this meeting. So that being said, I am the 24th Street Corridor Alliance chairperson. Precious and I both reside on the One Omaha board, which is the head of the alliances. So there is Nona, and then there is 24th Street Alliance. I hope I've answered those questions for those that have some curiosity of how this all comes about. I thank everyone for coming. Really appreciate, Dewan, your efforts, how you explained everything to us about communication. I think you did a wonderful job. Meredith, thank you also for coming. I do think that the surveys does provide a outstanding platform for Omaha, North Omaha in particular, to have a voice. I also would share or recommend that you take or consider some of the conversations that went on so that you can complete your task effectively. And again, thanks everyone for coming. Have a great day.
We just kind of stay in the well. I really want to thank you.